I laughed and shook my head. With that attitude, you're going to scare every guy in town away. She didn't even blink. A slow smile spread across her face as she looked straight into my eyes. Then let them go, she said softly. I only want one. For a second, I just stood there, trying to decide whether she was teasing me or making some clever joke. Before I could think of a reply, someone called her name from across the backyard, and she turned away with an easy smile, leaving me staring after her. Her words echoed in my mind far longer than I expected. The engagement party was in full swing. Soft music drifted through the evening air while guests laughed beneath strings of glowing lights. Children chased one another across the lawn, and relatives filled every corner with conversations that seemed louder as the night went on. I tried to focus on the celebration, but every few minutes my eyes searched the crowd until I spotted her again. Emma hadn't changed as much as I thought she would. She still had the same warm smile, the same calm confidence that made everyone around her feel comfortable. Yet there was something different too. She carried herself with a quiet certainty, as if life had taught her lessons she no longer questioned. The shy girl I had known years ago had become someone far stronger. We had grown up in the same small town where everyone knew everyone else's story. Our families attended the same community events, and we had spent countless summers with the same group of friends. Back then, we were close enough to joke about everything but never close enough to admit what really mattered. Then college happened. I left for another city, chasing a career I wasn't even sure I wanted, while she stayed behind to help her family after her father became ill. Life has a strange way of pulling people apart without either of them realizing it. Weeks became months, months became years, and eventually our conversations stopped altogether. Every now and then I would hear her name from mutual friends, but it was always followed by another topic before I could ask more. Coming back to town for my friend's engagement had felt like stepping into an old photograph. The streets were the same. The little coffee shop on the corner still served the best cinnamon rolls. Even the old clock tower still chimed every hour, just as it had when we were teenagers. Everything looked familiar, yet somehow different. I certainly hadn't expected to run into Emma. Our first conversation that evening had been awkward in the way reunions often are. We asked the usual questions. How have you been? Where are you living now? Are you still working at the same company? We laughed about old memories and mutual friends. It felt comfortable, almost effortless. Then came that unexpected exchange. With that attitude, you're going to scare every guy in town away. Good, she had answered. I only want one. The more I replayed it, the less it sounded like a joke. I caught myself wondering who that one was. Surely she couldn't have meant me. That would have been impossible, wouldn't it? We hadn't spoken properly in years. People moved on. They built new lives. Besides, someone like Emma probably had plenty of people interested in her. Later that evening, I found myself standing alone near the refreshment table, pouring another glass of lemonade. I sensed someone beside me before I looked up. You're overthinking it already, Emma said with a grin. I frowned. Overthinking what? My answer. I nearly dropped the glass. You always had that look, she continued. Whenever something confused you, your eyebrows did this funny little thing. I laughed despite myself. I didn't realize that was still obvious. It always was. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the party faded into the background as we stood there in comfortable silence. You've changed, I finally said. So have you. Hopefully for the better. I think so, she replied. There was sincerity in her voice that made it difficult to look away. Before I could ask what she had really meant earlier, another guest interrupted us, asking Emma for help with photographs. She excused herself with an apologetic smile. I'll see you before you leave, she said. I watched her disappear into the crowd, unsure why my heart suddenly felt heavier than it had all evening. As the celebration continued, I realized I wasn't thinking about work, the city, or the reason I'd come home anymore. I was thinking about a single sentence spoken so casually that everyone else had probably forgotten it the moment they heard it. But I couldn't. For the first time in years, I found myself hoping that maybe returning to this little town wasn't just a visit after all. Maybe it was the beginning of a story I had never seen coming. The party ended later than I expected, but Emma's words stayed with me long after I drove back to my parents' house. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her calm voice again. Then let them go. I only want one. I kept telling myself she couldn't have meant me. It was just a playful response to my joke. Still, something about the way she had looked at me made it impossible to forget. The next morning, I walked into the small coffee shop where we used to spend weekends after football games. The familiar smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries instantly brought back old memories. I ordered my usual drink and turned around, only to find Emma sitting by the window with a book in her hands. She smiled as if she had expected me to show up. I was wondering how long it would take, she said. You planned this? I asked with a laugh. Maybe. I carried my coffee to her table, still trying to understand whether all these meetings were coincidences or something more. For the next 2 hours, we talked about everything we had missed over the years. She told me about staying in town to take care of her father until he passed away. She spoke about rebuilding her life, starting her own small business, and learning to be independent. I shared stories about the city, my demanding job, and how success hadn't brought the happiness I thought it would. You always wanted something bigger, she said. I did. Did you find it? I looked into my cup before answering. No. She nodded as if she already knew the answer. Over the following days, meeting each other became almost a routine. Sometimes we met for coffee. Other times we walked through the old park where we had spent countless evenings as teenagers. We laughed about school memories, argued over who had been more stubborn, and teased each other the same way we always had. It felt strangely natural. One evening, we sat on a wooden bench overlooking the lake just outside town. The sunset painted the water in shades of orange and gold while a cool breeze rustled the trees around us. Emma remained unusually quiet. You've been thinking about something, I said. She looked down at her hands. I have. You can tell me. For several moments, she didn't answer. Then she took a slow breath. Do you remember the night before you left for college? I searched my memory. The farewell bonfire? She nodded. I wanted to tell you something that night. I smiled. What stopped you? You. I looked at her in confusion. You were talking about your plans, your dreams, the places you wanted to see. You were so excited. Then someone mentioned another girl who liked you. I frowned. I barely knew her. I didn't know that, Emma replied quietly. I thought you were happy. I didn't want to make things complicated. You never said anything. I know. She looked toward the lake. I loved you back then. The words settled between us in complete silence. I stared at her, unable to believe what I had just heard. I waited for the right moment, she continued. But the right moment never came. Then you left, and life kept moving. I didn't know what to say. Years of unanswered questions suddenly made sense. Why didn't you ever call? I finally asked. She gave a small smile. What would I have said? Hi, I've been in love with you for years? Despite everything, we both laughed. I was scared, she admitted. Not of rejection, but of losing our friendship completely. I looked at her for a long moment. You never lost it. Maybe not. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, I realized something I had refused to admit even to myself. Every conversation with Emma felt effortless. Every smile she gave me made this town feel more like home than it had in years. Before I could tell her how much she meant to me, her phone rang. The smile faded from her face as she looked at the screen. She hesitated before answering. I'll be there, she said quietly. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. "Everything okay?" I asked. She forced a smile. "I wish it were." "What happened?" She looked away. "Someone from my past is back." The happiness in her eyes disappeared instantly. "He says he wants another chance." I felt my heart sink. "There was never anything between us," she explained quickly. "But he doesn't want to accept that." I stood beside her as we began walking back toward town. For the first time since we had reunited, I realized that the future I had just started hoping for might already be in danger. And whatever this man wanted, I had a feeling our story was about to become far more complicated than either of us had imagined. The drive back into town was quiet. Neither of us said much after Emma told me that someone from her past had returned. I could see the worry in her eyes, even though she tried to hide it behind a polite smile. Every few minutes she looked out the window as if searching for answers that weren't there. The next afternoon, she called me. "Can we meet?" she asked. Her voice sounded different, tired, almost shaken. "Of course. Where are you?" "The old bridge." "I'll be there in 10 minutes." When I arrived, she was standing by the railing, watching the river flow beneath us. The breeze gently moved her hair, but she didn't notice. She seemed lost in thought. "He came to my shop today," she said before I could speak. "The man you told me about?" She nodded. "He apologized for everything. He said he had changed and wanted another chance." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him my heart had already made its choice." She finally turned toward me. But he wouldn't accept my answer. I felt anger rising inside me, but I stayed calm. "What happens now?" "He said he'll keep trying until I change my mind." I stepped closer. "You don't owe him anything, Emma." "I know." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the water moving beneath the bridge. "There was something else I never told you," I said. She looked up. "When I left this town years ago, I thought I was chasing my dreams. I believed success meant leaving everything behind. And I was wrong." She smiled softly. "The city gave me a career. It gave me opportunities. But it never gave me what I was looking for." "What were you looking for?" I looked directly into her eyes. "You." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "Every relationship I tried after leaving here failed," I admitted. "Not because those women weren't wonderful, but because none of them were you. I just didn't realize it until I came back." A tear rolled down her cheek. "You really mean that?" "I've never been more certain of anything." She laughed through her tears. I waited years to hear those words. So did I. Without thinking, I reached for her hand. This time, she didn't let go. Over the next few weeks, life slowly settled down. The man from her past finally understood that her decision wasn't going to change. He stopped calling, stopped visiting her shop, and quietly moved on with his own life. For the first time, nothing stood between us. We spent our evenings walking through the streets where we had grown up, discovering that the places we remembered looked different now, but somehow felt even more special together. One Saturday afternoon, I invited Emma to the hill overlooking the town. It had always been our favorite place as teenagers. The sunset painted the sky with shades of gold and crimson. "I've been thinking," I said. She smiled. "That usually means you're nervous." "I am." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her eyes widened. "Emma." Before I could finish, she covered her mouth with both hands. I spent years chasing a future that always felt incomplete. Then I came home and realized everything I'd ever wanted had been here all along. I opened the box. Inside was a simple ring. "I don't want to waste another day wondering what could have been." She was already crying. "So, will you marry me?" For a second, she couldn't speak. Then she laughed through her tears and nodded again and again. Yes. She wrapped her arms around me before I even had the chance to place the ring on her finger. I've wanted to say yes for years, she whispered. As we stood there watching the lights of our little town begin to glow below us, I couldn't help but laugh. Looks like you really did scare every other guy in town away. She smiled, resting her head against my shoulder. That was always the plan. I looked at her. So, when you said you only wanted one? She squeezed my hand. I meant you then. She smiled even brighter. And I still mean you now. Sometimes love doesn't arrive when people expect it. Sometimes it waits quietly through distance, missed chances, and years of silence until two hearts are finally ready to choose each other. Looking back, I realized that one playful joke at an engagement party had changed everything. What I thought was a casual conversation became the beginning of the greatest chapter of my life. And every time someone asked us how our story started, we would smile, look at each other, and remember the moment she answered my joke with 7 unforgettable words, "Good. I only want one."